So I'm extremely happy that we can really engender certain dialogue here, including new proposals and new ideas to introduce randomness. I think we didn't think about that at all during the summer school, but it's of course a very interesting proposal too. Now we are already, unfortunately, coming to the last presentation from the young scientists from the summer school, and it will be on the large future topic, well, already now actually, on mobility, and we will observe in the future a large increase in mobility, and of course mobility comes at certain costs, individual costs, which do not matter to such a great extent, but also social costs, externalities. And we come to, perhaps for economists, some more traditional proposals, how you can cope with this increasing externalities of mobility with simple economic instruments. And the group working on that was composed by Ryan Abbey from Switzerland, Panos Alemanos, and John Alexeiou, both from Greece. Unfortunately, Ryan, who was supposed to present, can't be here today because he has caught this nasty norovirus in Portugal. So he briefly had to cancel his attendance. But I think all of the students at the summer school are extremely qualified, and it was very easy for me to find somebody who can jump in for Ryan, even though he was not directly then working on the topic, and that's Mario Malzacher, who was actually working on the first topic too, regarding the innovation capital, but he will present the other topic today, and he will also be able to answer all your questions, I suppose, easily, I guess. So the floor is yours, Mario, and it's on the true costs of mobility.
So let's play some PowerPoint karaoke. No, don't worry. I had a call with Ryan yesterday night, and he told me more or less what he wanted to say. I will try to produce that as good as possible, and if you allow me, I will add some own thoughts. So what do we have here? We have here green and fair mobility for everyone. What great words in German we would say, eierlegende Wollmilchsau. Sounds good. Let's see what's behind that. We talk about mobility. Increasing mobility is one of the mega trends we have. If we look on the figures, we see here in non-OECD countries, mobility is supposed to increase until 2050 to triple. And even in OECD countries which are more developed, like Greece, we have an increase of 30%. So we see we have a lot of more mobility in the future, and this has obviously impacts. It has obviously positive impacts. A positive impact is, for example, that we can be here with people from Kenya, from Greece, and talk about future economic systems, but there are obviously also bad impacts. We call them here externalities. What are externalities? Externalities are uncompensated negative costs that affect the party who did not choose to incur that cost. So what are externalities of mobility? One is obviously, and that's the most thing we talk about, is global warming. Global warming is not only global warming, it's also an economic threat. It's expensive, and it affects everyone on the world. If we talk about Inuits, they probably did not cause the climate change, but they will lose their house, and we don't pay for them. So that's an externality. Global warming comes mainly from fossil fuel. 57% of global greenhouse gas emission comes from fossil fuel, and 95% of transportation energy from today comes, that's a figure from 2013, comes from fossil fuel. So that will obviously change in the future because we have new technologies, but that's the case we have now. Another externality is land use. We see here a picture of a city. Cities are covered by streets, instead of having streets there, we could have parks, we could have trees, we could have pedestrian areas, but no, we use it for streets which are noisy and secondly pollute the air. Here we see a picture from Beijing. Beijing has really bad air conditions there, which is a health issue, which costs them a lot. Secondly, we see here a traffic jam, which creates opportunity costs. So these are just a few examples for externalities. Where do they come from? We see here on this graphic, 58% of externalities come from private cars, and in comparison, just 8% are from railway and water transport. So obviously that's because we have much more private vehicles, but we see where the big share of the cake comes from. So if we have a look on the costs, here just 3 examples of Switzerland. We have around 9 billion Swiss francs environmental damage per year. We have 3 million damage for congestions, opportunity costs just in Switzerland per year. And if you have a look on EU plus Norway and Switzerland, we talk about around 8% of the GDP, which externalities cost us. So who should pay for these externalities? Should the government pay for them? Should taxpayers pay for them? Or the victims? If I become sick in Beijing because of the bad air, I pay the bill for the doctor, not the one who used the car. So that's the situation we have today. The solution mostly is that we say we subsidize public transport. Or we say we have to enact environmental regulations. The bad thing about subsidizing is it's costly, first of all. Secondly, it's unfair because everybody pays it. If I stay my whole life in my house, I never use any transport, I will pay it anyway. And thirdly, also public transport has externalities and doesn't pay for it. In Switzerland, it's 1 billion Swiss franc. So that's why the team came up with the user pays principle. That's not a new approach, but it's an approach which is not used everywhere and not completely so far. And what does it mean? It means the individual user of mobility pays for the externalities. That means that we use the lever we have in the system we have given is the price. So if mobility is obviously a normal good, the more income we have or the lower the price is for it, the more we use it, at least in the long time. So it gets the real costs, that mobility. And obviously if we use this principle, we don't need subsidies anymore. So if we have now everyone pays his fair share, no free riders, and all costs of externalities are incorporated in the price. So the team came up with this 4-step plan. First of all, they want to phase up fossil fuel subsidies. Secondly, they want to stop subsidizing mobility, put a tax on mobility, and lastly, use the money to reduce taxes. So let's have a look on each one of them. Today, unfortunately, in Europe, we don't pay fossil fuel subsidies as far as I know. But we see here on this graph, in countries like Saudi Arabia, we pay around $1,000 a year per person in fossil fuel subsidies. We have, even in China, which is a huge economy, we subsidize fossil fuel. And that we do even if we know, and due to the Copenhagen consensus, phasing out fossil fuel energy subsidies would have benefits more than 50 times the cost. So that's definitely something worth to change and something really easy to change in the technical way. In the political way, obviously not. Secondly, we should stop subsidizing mobility in general. Subsidizing is in general inefficient. With subsidies, we keep things running which are not efficient, which are not the most efficient thing. Secondly, subsidies are dangerous. They give an incentive to overuse things because they are too cheap. If I take the ticket from Switzerland, we have it's called GEA. It's a flat rate ticket I pay once a year, and then I can use every train, every bus as much as I want. I personally do have that, and I don't think anymore how much I use a bus or a train. I don't think about if I should stay at home or not. And that's not the way it should be. Secondly, we have urban sprawl. If it's really expensive to go to have a far way to my work, then I maybe think about to move to another city to be closer from my workplace. And thirdly, it does not compensate externalities as long as we pay subsidies. So that's why they suggest to discard public transport subsidies. The third step is to put a tax on mobility. Here we have a list of things, of externalities which we could charge. That could be noise, nuisance, air pollution, climate warming, water and soil contamination, shrink of biodiversity, land take, travel. To put a price on them, we can calculate that. We do have the numbers today. And it's also possible to use it. We have today GPS technology, for example. If we take road pricing is possible with, for example, a GPS signal in the car. If we take peak hours in streets, we see between 7 and 9, there are a lot of people. We can charge people who use the streets during this time. Also in public transport, there we can do it with the ticket price. We can also charge for very congested roads. So people will choose roads which are cheaper, which are not so full. And we can charge cars for their noise nuisance. That's obviously a thing which there's no obvious price, but still you can have a key on how much it costs. We can charge for diesel particles. Then we are just dependent that the manufacturer shows us the right output, but that should work in the future, I guess. And we can also charge for production externalities. Just one remark from me, it's around 10% of the CO2 emissions come from production in the lifetime of a car. And then this could look like this, and that's an estimation from Ryan, how it could look like. And if we look on the price without externalities, then we obviously would use the car because it's the cheapest mean of transport. But if we really add externalities to each mean of transport, we probably have a big incentive to switch from car to a train, because it's the more efficient mean of transport. And if I still decide that I want to have a comfortable car, then I can do that, but I paid. Then it's okay. So put a tax on mobility is definitely makeable. It's not easy. We need some investments, obviously, but it's makeable. And it gives really incentive to choose the most efficient mean of transport. And thirdly, it gives a really good incentive to invest in the right technology. We have already today many new things new ideas for economy. We have the sharing economy with Uber, or in Switzerland more known as the mobility car sharing, which is quite old already. We have self-driving cars from Google, maybe soon from Apple, from Mercedes, what else? We have clean tech, we have electric cars, which are from the engine much more efficient, and even also from the noise nuisance much more efficient. We have new means of transport, like the Hyperloop from Elon Musk, or we have the Cargo Tube in Switzerland project. These are all projects which have a huge potential, and they become even more attractive if we price right. Then we will really invest in the right things. So, and the last step is to use that money, which we have new income. And obviously, if we raise a new tax, people will have less in the first step. But secondly, if we reduce taxes with that, we give it to them back. So the user pays, but in general, people have the same amount of money like before. Or the second approach is, if we come back on the example of Beijing, we know that people become more sick because of the bad air quality, and we know how much this costs the health system. So we can earmark that money and bring it directly into the health system. That's the second approach. The second question they had was, who should get the money? Obviously, there are externalities which are more local, like air pollution, like noise nuisance. And there are externalities like global warming, which are global. Probably it's quite hard to share the incomes globally to find their international agreement, so probably it will stay in the country. But still, you can share it between the federal, state, and the commune and cantons. That you have to find a fair key how to share it. Good, so finally they summarize, with this system we have a more efficient, a transparent, and a fair use of transit transport. We have an answer on mobility growth, and we have less production of externalities because people will use things which have less externalities. We compensate the social costs which mobility occurs. And we save money because we will finally use the most efficient means of transport. And let me add one thing. If we talk about global warming or externalities in general, we should use that not only for mobility, because mobility is just a small part in the part of global warming. We also have, for example, the food sector. We could put a price on meat, on sugar, on rice. Let's go on. We could put a price on drugs. Everything which has bad externalities we can price. So as long as we stay in the system we have to use the lever of the price to use the most efficient things. That's it from my side. I'm looking forward to your questions or discussion.
Thank you very much, Mario, for this beautiful presentation, and I can only compliment you because, again, you did it without being fully prepared, and you still managed it very well, I think, and a very clear presentation. And now you get the questions even to answer. So let's have the questions and remarks, please. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for this analysis. I think it was very interesting and I learned a lot. But I have some questions, or I wonder a bit about one point. First of all, I heard a lot about external costs, but absolutely nothing about external benefits. That I have a benefit that there is a train around, that I know that I could take this train. Or if I'm sitting in my car, that it's okay that I have external benefits, but that someone else or a lot of them are taking the train and not the car. That's one thing. And then another thing is, what would happen if you would make the same analysis in terms of what we called once Gemeinwirtschaft, cooperative economics, when we are talking about potential benefits, indirect benefits. I mean, all these things that we have like security and so on, we don't have them because we like them. We don't have Feuerwehr because we like that our house burns down and that we want to have, in these terms, more thinking in these terms. In a way, in a historical perspective as well, as far as I know, it was quite important that Switzerland had a lot of infrastructure which are here for everyone and for every use. So that's a bit the critical points that I have. Is it really right that we look at these things from such a subjective perspective and we are talking about collective and common goods?
Are you talking about not in my backyard thing as well? Or not? In general, yeah, of course, a good system has a lot of benefits for an economy, obviously. But I think the question is which mean of transport is the best for us. And maybe it's not the train, maybe it's not the private car, but what we think is if we price correctly, we will invest in the best mean of transport. And if it's the train, then we will automatically have a really good network or a really good grid for public transport. That's what we hope, that the invisible hand of Adam Smith will create that.
No, not only in Engelberg. Yes, Gerd, please. Gerd first, and I have you.
Thank you very much. Just a technical correction, a little technical correction and a provoking example. The technical correction is the noise nuisance of cars is not coming from the motor, or it's coming from the engine if the car does not run or only at the speed of 10 kilometers per hour. Otherwise, it comes from the tires.
Okay.
So what we need is small cars with small tires. So the large tires that we all like, that you look a bullish car, that's the problem because of the supersonic sound that you make in rolling the tires on the asphalt. Just technicalities. The other provoking example is Mercedes-Benz started 20 years ago a program that was called Living in Your Car, because the psychologists had detected that people like to be stuck in a traffic jam alone in the car, because the car was the only remaining place where you could live your individuality. You can call the people that you want, you can cruise, you can smoke, you can telephone, you can have the music that you like, everything. And so they don't claim they like a luxurious car, they can stay for themselves.
And they shall pay. Yeah.
I think there's nothing to add.
Then they shall pay. Yes, the lady in the back, please.
Thanks a lot. We already discussed a bit about externalities. What I just want to urge is that I think it should be extended to international mobility, like airplanes. I think, especially for our generation, which is used to travel to, I don't know, to a city abroad for a weekend, I think international mobility is much more important regarding, or at least as important as national mobility when talking about climate issues.
Yeah, or at least the team thought about international mobility as well. That should be applied there as well.
Professor Kierman.
Oh, thank you very much for the presentation. I have just two remarks. One is about externalities. Of course, this is a very old problem in economics. And what you put out very carefully was how I could measure all these different things, the amount of emissions, the time, and so forth. But what you didn't put up was how exactly I translate that into costs. And that, of course, is the huge problem for economists. What is the actual cost of my staying in the town a little bit longer and so forth? And, of course, many attempts have been made, like the tax to enter London, and that varies, and things vary with particular times in the day. So I think that the problem, as you put it up, is once again, looks like a sort of technical problem, but it's a very tricky one. Second point, you have to get people to vote for these things. And that's another important problem. When you say to people, we're going to tax your mobility, you may not find that that's a sort of flavor of the month. And then my last remark would be, you sort of say, well, essentially what we want to do is put transport into private hands, because privatization. But we know from experience that that's not always a very good thing. British Rail is a wonderful example of how that sort of blew up. And an alternative, which people don't want to talk about much, is to actually make public transport more efficient. Why don't we make more effort, rather than say, well, we just privatize this, to actually get engineers and other people to make the public transport system more efficient? Because in some sense it's a natural monopoly. You don't actually necessarily need different trains competing on the same lines and then trying to share their revenues and suing each other because they stopped the other train and so forth. In some situations it's simpler to have a monopoly that runs well. And there are monopolies, state monopolies in the world, that do actually run quite well.
First remark, or the first question, I didn't mention, and that's obviously a problem, how to calculate the costs. And the proposal of the team was to have an impartial NGO who calculates that and gives the price to the government, so that it's not political influence. And so that they put the tax, they just take the cost from this NGO and they put it in a tax. That was their proposal. Obviously that can not work as well, but it's probably the best approach.
But even impartial NGOs can make mistakes in their calculations.
Of course, but I don't see a better solution. And the second thing was...
people should vote.
One example we had in Germany, I think it was in '98, when the SPD and the Green Party came in charge. Their topic of the campaign was the Ökosteuer. They put a price on petrol, and they said, we will price petrol per liter, 5 euros per liter, as I remember, and it was quite successful. So Gerhard Schröder became the chancellor afterwards. But obviously we need awareness that people react on such campaigns.
Yeah, thank you. I want to first make a remark that in that kind of discussions, and today now I hear a confusion in the word of mobility. Mobility actually, or I think, means that we have the possibility to go to the places that matter to us. So where we live and where we work and where our friends are and so on. And mobility is not how many kilometers we drive or ride. And then I think the really important part in all of this discussion is where you build the streets. So the question is not who pays external costs, because when there is a street, then there are cars. When there is no street, there are no cars. So that was like a question, where in your model is this decision-making process of building up infrastructures, which are bigger questions that what do I pay right now when I use my car or when I take the train?
I think that will happen automatically. Let's take the Swiss Wahlen, elections. Thank you. Let's take the Swiss elections now. If we have a system, it's called Smart Vote. You can answer questions, and one of these questions is, do we need more highways? And if many people say they're yes, and then they vote for the people which are suggested, so for example the SVP who wants to build more highways, then obviously we will build more highways. But people will only say that we need more highways if they drive a car. I personally don't have a car, I don't need highways, I will not vote for someone who will build more highways. So this will happen automatically if we have a price system which gives the incentive to use the public transport. We will build less streets and we will build more mobility, more public transport, as the vote we had recently in Switzerland when we voted that the train company SBB gets a lot of money in the future because we have more than 50% there.
Yes, but you still have the problem that now you have to make decisions for the next 50 years or so, if not more. So
my answer stays the same.
I think this problem you always have. Could you quickly say something on the mobility point? So she was suggesting that mobility is useful, of course, and you should be free to go where you want, but what is the point, again, to make this clear?
Yeah, the point is that if I choose to have friends in UK, to have friends in Stockholm, and I want to visit them every week, I can do that, but I have to pay for it, for the costs which I put on others.
Yes.
And if I do that, then it's okay.
Yes, behind, yeah.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I have a question also about externalities. So I wonder, for example, also in the Swiss public policy debate, then the question often comes up: well, do then only the people who can afford mobility still be able to drive around, to use the mobility as you just mentioned it, to go to see their friends and go to work, etc. So I wonder a little bit about the social costs or the social externalities of such a system. This is something that is often very kind of then intensely discussed in public policy debates. Thank you.
I remember I had a few years ago when I was in China with a colleague who studies in China the same discussion, because China pays subsidies for every kind of mobility. And the reason why they do that is they say, if we pay people mobility, if it's cheap, our economy will raise because people can start to run their own business because it's payable. I think mostly that's wrong. Because mostly the more mobility we have is not really necessary. A lot of mobility we have is from free time, and the mobility we have to work is probably the part we will have anyway. But we give people an incentive to work really close from the place they work. So that's why I think we should do that.
Yes, well, okay.
What about I don't want to imply that I believe this is a good argument, but it's an argument that often comes up, that people say, well, then, if the price is so high, then only, really, basically, I make it a bit simple, the rich ones can travel around, and the poor ones, they have to stay where they are.
The second argument is that we paid back through lower taxes. So in average, and obviously the question is always the key you have, but in average people pay the same amount like they did before. And people who decide to drive more, then they obviously pay more. But I think that's okay if you decide to drive a lot and damage the environment, then you can pay more.
Mr. Stadelmann? The man over here. Could you raise your hand? Yeah.
Your title is True Cost of Mobility. Why did you forget the airplane traffic? If I go to Barcelona, I pay less by EasyJet than by car.
Yeah. First of all, I didn't choose the title. I didn't make to the slides nothing. Secondly, it's so cheap because we don't pay the externalities. That's why it is so cheap.
The same thing applies. I guess it's just now focused
It
on
would not be
traffic.
possible anymore, definitely not.
Yeah. One here, and then Bruno. And the final one for you, if you don't have any more, yeah? Yes?
Yeah. So, however, I think that his comment was quite is quite important because one thing you haven't mentioned is actually the reach of the consequences that would imply, because sort of putting the cost, the true cost of mobility to the user means that actually you also have to pay for the mobility that is included in the production, for example, of our standard of living right now. So, for example, if you could go to the supermarket and you buy your stuff, you usually buy bananas, for example, pasta that comes from elsewhere in the world, or even, for example, the meat you buy, which is produced by soy from Brazil, etc. So, yesterday someone mentioned that, I mean, all these the connections that precede the production of our standard of living right now, and if you would consequently, in a consequent way, apply this idea, the costs for example, just food would explode for many people, and then we would have this situation. In the first place, it would definitely explode for many people, because like the consequence would be, and I think that is a good consequence, by the way, that, for example, we would come back to locally produced food and so on. But I think that's a quite interesting consequence of this idea. So, but it changes. It requires the sort of the willingness of the people to accept that. Yeah? So it's not only, oh, okay, then I drive a bit less. That's not the consequence of it. It's not, okay, well, I choose whether or not I go to the cinema this evening. It's a change of living. Yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you said it already. We will choose the products which are better for our world. Maybe I will eat an apple instead of a pineapple, which is probably not worse for my health. Personally, I have a basket in St. Gallen. They send me every week seasonal vegetables and fruits from the area of St. Gallen. And I get the whole year a basket every week. And that's perfect. I don't need the pineapple. So I don't see the negative thing of that. So that's a positive impact for me.
And the externalities, if I may simply add, because that was on the slides too, I mean, they exist, they are estimated 8 billion for Switzerland. It may be 10 billion, it may be 6 billion, okay, we are not so precise, but it's not enormous, as you seem to suggest, that prices now for food would rise as a consequence by a large amount. And the costs are here in any case, okay? Now they will only be fairly distributed. Bruno.
I would like to address the problem of technical damage to economic costs. We know that this is a problem, but I can report that modern research in economics helps you, supports your proposal. Alois Stutz and I made an analysis of the costs of commuting, and we find, people who commute always say, oh, it's great fun commuting. I find that relaxing, etc. We find that people who commute, taking everything else constant, are more unhappy. And these are exactly the costs of commuting for these particular individuals. And we could even impose a tax on that. So I'm sorry to say that a chemist should not necessarily quote psychological evidence when it is wrong.
Very well. So we have time for one final question or two if there is just a short remark. Yes?
Sorry again. Well, I think a bit in defense of Gerd Volkers. I really wonder if we know why and and how people and for what people pay and what are the true costs of all this. I think when it's about driving a car, when it's about taking EasyJet, they buy something else. They buy something like adventure, they buy something like love, they buy something like, I don't know, a discotheque or whatever, and freedom and things like this. And therefore I really think I'm not sure that within this paradigm that you presented that you really can solve this problem. I'm not sure because of the common goods problematic, because of it's not really clear what are the preferences, what is behind driving a car. And I think there are so many things behind, and we know most of the time it's about free time, it's about leisure time. And this is historical the way. I mean, cars are developed because of more or less leisure and until today.
That's why I have my remark in the end that we should not choose that only for mobility. We should use that for every product which harms our world or something, our environment. And now I forgot what I want to say. A second point, what was the question? No, it will come back.
Okay. Do we have a short final remark? Otherwise we are perfect on time actually. So thank you very much again. Very well done.